Hey, so this video, I'm going to talk about how I made Argon. Obviously, I made it a long time ago, and if I were making it today, I wouldn't necessarily do everything I did in it, but I think it'll be interesting to see my creative process and why I did the things I did. Without further ado, let's get into it. Argon starts out with one of the two main chord patches playing. I also rendered a chord hit out, looped it and resampled it. I then have one of the two main pluck sounds, which plays sort of a small introductory melody. I have a self-made recording, which was taken as I was boarding a plane to La Palma, and then right before the drop, the drums, the bass, and this train sample come in. Let's go over that in more detail. So this first pad, this one, is actually just an adapted version of the Darkmind pad. Darkmind was the last track I made in FL Studio before I switched over to Ableton Live, and I just went through all my old FL projects and saved the Serum presets so that I could use some of those sounds in my future projects at the time. So this is actually quite a simple patch. It's this one wavetable. This waveform is a third harmonic sine wave, and then it has a couple other low harmonics, a couple ones at the top as well, just sprinkled in. Gives it a bit more of an edge than just being a pure clean sine wave. And that's being detuned quite heavily. Oscillator B is just a simple triangle wave, one octave up, and LFO1 controls the level of oscillator B, as well as the cutoff frequency on the filter. Just gives it a bit more movement. I didn't want to sync it to tempo, I just wanted it to feel more natural and not too sync to the beat, as is the case with the rest of the track. Most of the sound though comes from the hyperdimension and the distortion in the effects, so I'll just turn off all the effects after it and show you what just the Serum patch sounds like. And then without these two. So on this tube distortion, I have it set to pre-mode, where the filter in the distortion filters the sound first, and then it gets put through the distortion. So this filter gets automated up through the intro. You can see that the distortion frequency goes from being 0, so where you can't hear anything, up to just under halfway. I then added a couple of effects to it slightly, just to change the tone so that it didn't sound identical to the one in Darkmind. In this case I have an amp and cabinet combo, and then just a utility automating the volume. So this is what it sounds like without, and this is with. I have a utility to automate the volume, because if you decide to automate the track volume, there's no way to easily change that if you decide that the track is too loud in general. Additionally, the gain on the utility plugin can go way higher than just the 6 decibels on the track itself. The amp is set to blues mode. The 3 ones that I pretty much only exclusively use are clean, blues and bass. I feel like the other ones are too distorted whenever I'm trying to process something with this plugin. And then, even though the dry-wet goes down over time, the volume, this volume slider here, goes up from 0, which means that even though the processing from the amp becomes more extreme over time, it also becomes quieter. And then the cabinet effect just tames the high frequencies created by the amp a little bit. I like using cabinets instead of low passes, just because they give the sound a little bit more character than a bland low pass filter. Just before the drop, the pad is sent to a delay send, which rings out for quite a while. One feature I like about Echo is that you can actually add reverb on top of the delay, which I used in this case. This resample is just the main chord rendered out and then with fades added, so I took this sound and then put a fade on it here. I also pitched it up an octave. Closer to the drop, I extend the fade slightly so that the sound extends out longer up until this point. This plug is an operator patch with just a load of effects on it. This is what it sounds like with the effects. And this is without. So in this case, I have all the oscillators in operator running in serial. So A is FM'd by B, B by C, and C by D. But in this case, I'm only using oscillators A and B. The majority of the sound comes from the chain afterwards. This patch is just a simple sine wave being FM'd by another one, which is 4 times higher. Oscillator B has an extremely short decay time of 26 milliseconds, so it really only provides that click at the start. This is what it sounds like without. With. This filter isn't actually doing any filtering, its cutoff is at 18.5 kHz, but I am using the drive control to be able to distort the sound within operator before the effects chain. Oscillator A's decay time is automated, such that it becomes longer, going from 46 milliseconds, so almost as short as oscillator B at the beginning, up to 2.5 seconds. So the sound gradually gets more and more sustained. In the effects chain, I start with a kilohertz transient shaper. This brings the attack down so that the transient doesn't stick out as much as it does before. After that, I have a resonator, which is tuned to fifths above the root. The 2 and 3 resonators are for left and right, respectively, and then same with 4 and 5. So if I set both of these to 7 and both of these to 19, it means that it will ring the same in each ear. If you're familiar with how resonator sounds, the effect, you may well have heard that out in the track, because it's quite distinctive. After that, an overdrive distorts the low mids a little bit. And then an erosion set to sine mode makes the highs a little less harmonic. And then none of these effects are doing anything yet. This plain sound is one I recorded myself on a Zoom H5 when I went on holiday to La Palma. I was boarding this slightly dodgy plane, and I liked how one of the jet engines sounded, so I recorded it. This is the original recording. Obviously that sounds quite different. In this case I've just got an auto filter, which is doing most of the work in filtering it up, with the frequency and the resonance automated. And then I also use the LFO, which is a part of auto filter, which automates the cutoff on top of that. This amount knob slowly increases. And then after that, utility, which isn't doing anything yet. As a lead into the drop, I have some Foley sounds, which I use as percussion. Here I have a recording of me cutting something. It's got a little bit of EQ on it, a frequency shifter, and then it's being panned from left to right with every hit. I'm also sending it to the delay and reverb channels, so this one here is just a reverb preset I made myself, and then it's being sent to the same echo as the pad was. After that, I've got a recording from a granular synth called Ribs, which I used once to make this sample and then never used again. Sounds like this. I also have a cave water recording, which I also recorded myself, this time from when I was on holiday in Cornwall. This one's being compressed super heavily, and it also has some panning automation on it. That's the main snare. It's got a kilohertz transient shaper on it again, just turning down, just taming the transient a little bit. A glue compressor, which compresses it a little. A grain delay, which pitches it down. This is what it sounds like without. With. And then just a drum bus to distort it, but actually the drum bus shapes it a lot. This is what it sounds like before. This is after. And then for the kick, this was the first track in which I used a ring mod kick fill, this sound. you can see I've got a ring mod here where the cutoff and the dry wet's being automated. This is actually, like I said, the first track, and it's become one of my favorite sounds. I've used it in a lot of other tracks since, and the utility plugin just fades it in a little bit so it's not too powerful straight from the beginning. There are actually two bass sounds before the drop. One is this recording of my school's double bass, which is reversed and it has a flanger. And the other one is the main bass for the first drop, which is quite simple actually. It's just an operator sine wave and then two saturators on after it. This version isn't doing anything yet. Here I automated the bass of the saturator. I'm not entirely sure what this control does. It increases the effect for high frequencies if you turn it up. So in this case, it's distorting more of the high frequencies at this point than here. Lastly, I have another self-recorded sample, this time of a train passing by. I've got a high pass on it to remove any rumbly lows that would have been in the sample, and a flanger on it. It's also being sent to this echo send channel. This section, drop 1A, consists of drums, percussion, the two main pad sounds, some bass sounds, and a bit more field recording. This time, the snare is layered with some Foley, which I also recorded in Cornwall. I can't remember exactly what the sound was, but I believe it's the sound of a stick being dragged across a surface. I'm honestly not sure. The percussion, once again, is mostly Foley. I have these two samples, which I recorded once, of a Coca-Cola can. This one's just high passed, but the other one is frequency shifted down a ton, and then high passed. It's also compressed quite heavily. I also edited it in Ableton just to make all of these transients fall on the beat exactly. It doesn't make much of a difference, but I think it adds a little bit more groove to the track, because even though it's quite an unquantized track, I still prefer having a couple of, especially with my percussion, having it a bit more quantized. I've got more knife sounds here. That's my favorite one there. And then after that, some more cave sounds. This time, both the pad sounds are playing. This first one is also a serum patch, and it sounds like this. Both of these waveforms are taken from a wavetable I made called Better Shapes, which has all of the waveforms of basic shapes, but then a couple other ones that I added on top of it. Both of these oscillators are being detuned quite heavily, and there's some white noise on the top. This add bass filter just seems to act sort of like a tilt shelf. It turns down the highs and it accentuates the lows at the same time. And it's good for more broader EQ work, because actually it does make quite a big difference in the patch. This is without. It gives it a lot of the character that it has. In the effects section, I again have a distortion with a filter before it. This time just on the soft clip mode. I didn't want to distort it as hard as the other pad. The drive is being automated near the end of this section. Then I've got subtle compressor, subtle EQ, just bringing back some of the highs, and a hyperdimension at the end of it makes it a bit more stereo. Here's the frequency being automated, and the drive at the end there. As far as effects go, there's a utility which turns it down. Two auto pans which don't do anything yet. A resonator which turns on as the pad fades back in. If I pause it here, you might be able to hear it better. That sound comes from the resonator. Another erosion, again on sine mode, just makes it a little bit more crunchy. A saturator which isn't doing anything yet. Then an EQ which just removes a bit of mud. A frequency shifter which gives it some movement towards the start of drop 1B. And then an auto filter which doesn't do anything yet. Actually, really importantly, is this compressor. I didn't like the amount of compression that I had on everything. I wanted to sidechain these chords a little bit more. So this one's being sidechained directly from the kick with a ratio of infinity to 1 and quite a long release time, actually a very long release time. This makes it fade out a lot more. This means it comes back in a lot later whenever the kick hits. This Dark Mind pad becomes a lot brighter near the end of it as the cabinet is turned down here. And then the filter fades it out. Together, the two pads sound like this. Here I have the same double bass recording, this time not reversed, just playing the whole thing. And then just this final section of a sound design thing I made a couple of years back. This is reversed. The full thing sounds like this. This bass just keeps the same settings throughout, doesn't really change much, except at the end here, where it almost completely fades out. And then lastly, here there's a field recording, again from the Palmer. This is just of a fountains. In drop 1B, the percussion gets more intense. I have both chord sounds again, some edited tongue drum layers, and the main pluck melody comes in. This time, some slightly different snare layers. But more importantly, there's a lot more percussion. So I originally had this kick effect sound before the ring mode kick fill. I believe it was an automated grain delay, but then it became really hard to mix because it sounds so different to the actual kick. So I put it into its separate track later and did the ring mode kick fill instead. Some more Coca-Cola sounds, some more granular sounds, some more knife sounds, some more cave water sounds. Then here there's me tapping some object. Being panned from left to right again. And then some Foley sounds that I recorded being put into Fruity Granulizer, which I also made ages ago. For this first chord sound, one of the auto pans finally comes into use here. I have automation on the resonator and the frequency shifter as well. Here's the resonator. And here's the frequency shifter. The second chord comes in a lot more slowly. It plays this melody in the background, and then the distortion slowly fades up. and then I slowly add in more harmony below the main melody here. This sound is my Happy Tongue Drum Mini, which I put some effects on using the Kilohertz Snap Heap. This is it without the effects. This is it with. So there's a delay, which is being automated, a bit crush, and then a chorus, which makes it a bit more stereo. This tongue drum backing loop just has an auto pan on it, which sort of reinforces the half bar rhythm. This filter isn't used yet, but it's worth noting that I actually have two, which are panned quite hard, far left and far right. This one, and this one. They're also being pitched around and matched to the BPM. Together they sound like this. This sine compression sound I just made a couple of years back. It's a pretty standard sine compression bass, nothing special. And then some more ambience, just being looped for the first half. Also, this pluck from the intro comes in 3/4 of the way through and starts playing a small melody, which leads into the main melodic break section here. These two plucks are doing a sort of call and response thing during the break. It's worth noting that this one is panned 24 left and this one's panned 24 right. For this first one, I'm only really automating the amount it's being sent to the delay channels, which is here, this one, and then C echo. This one just has regular quarter note echo, and this one's a dotted quarter note echo, so it's a slightly different rhythm. It's also being sent a lot more to the reverb than it was before during the drop, just because there aren't any chord sounds that can fill out, so I need to use a reverb instead. This second pluck is also being sent to the dotted echo here. Again, quite a simple pluck patch. In this case, it's just two basic waveforms, one with sync on it, one with no warp mode, both being detuned, and then the cutoff is being automated quite heavily. I have the level of both of the oscillators being controlled by the velocity, because I do mess about with the velocity in the MIDI patch slightly. And then the effects, just standard hyperdimension, soft clipping, distortion a little bit, and some EQ, taking out the lows, bringing the highs down a little. This comb filter isn't being used yet. It has a dry wet of 0 that comes in later. Same thing with this frequency, actually same thing with all these effects, except the utility obviously, which is panning it right, because it's sort of a call and response thing. If I play the two together, you'll be able to hear which one's which. I need to freeze this, unfortunately. My computer is taking it badly enough as it is. The interesting bit is that during the intro, this Darkmind pad is just playing regularly in E minor. You see the big indicator of that it's E minor is obviously the second, but then also the minor sixth here. Whereas during the break, this speed plug here goes to E Dorian with the C sharp, and that comes in later during the second drop. So it sort of switches between the two halfway through. This pad sound is just playing what it was before, the same melody, just with a bit more harmony below it. The field recordings are also extended a little bit. I have this sound of a train coming to a stop, which I also recorded in Cornwall. Sounds like this. And the other one is me walking around in France. Before the second drop, I have this fill, which I made from the stock Impulse 606 kit. Then I have some crunch sounds. I don't think I recorded all of these crunch sounds, but I did record the ice ones myself. That one and this one. Again, being sent to the reverb send. This scrape sound has a high pass and a reverb on it. This ring mod, which is being automated, makes it a lot more stereo. But the reason you don't notice that really is because of this spectral blur. Spectral blur isn't a part of the regular Ableton effects, it's actually a Max for Live plugin. But if you have Ableton Live Suite like I do, it's in one of the available packs. I think it's called Creative Extensions. I really like the sound this plugin makes because it doesn't sound exactly the way that the reverb does, and you also have some additional controls as to which parts of your original sound it blurs. I tend to turn the halo down and turn the delay comp up because it does introduce about 80 milliseconds of latency. In this case, I've pushed it back 92 milliseconds using the track delay. And it also has a couple of other bugs. For example, this dry wet control, instead of just filling up the entire width of the track, has a set width and you have to drag it down. It's super annoying, but it's worth it for the sound that it gives. It also glitches sometimes, but I like it too much, so I put up with it. I really enjoy the sound that it gives, the sort of effect that it creates, and if I end up making more breakdown videos, you'll definitely hear it on the future ones. The kick and the snare in drop 2 are pretty much the same as drop 1. For this bit I have a ring mod kick fill, and I used a more Foley rich clap sound, which is also delayed slightly. It comes in a bit later than you'd expect it to. Then the percussion is pretty much identical. Nothing really new in the second drop. I have this one bit where everything goes super stereo, which I believe is here. Here. And then the chord sound fades to the left. There, here. That fades to the left, and all of the percussion sounds sort of go to the right, as well as the plugs. The chords pad, again in this section, is pretty much identical. In the pause section here, I have an auto pan leading up to it. Here. Yeah, I need to freeze this. Oh, nice. Freezing it doesn't actually do anything. There we go. The distortion filter here cuts the sound out completely. And then, most obviously, I have a resonator which comes up here, and the decay is being turned up quite far as well as a frequency shifter here, and this Max for Live plugin. If I pause it here, you can hear it. Let's listen to just the resonator here. Oh, that's not going to work, is it? Because I've frozen it. Hold on. There, that's the sound of the resonator, because I turned the decay up so far. I also have this hard curve saturator, where the dry wet is being brought up from 0 to 10.6%. Any more than that and it could absolutely demolish this sound. It actually goes up 2% more for the second half, but I didn't trust myself to do any more than that. Then I'll just talk about this plug first, the speed plug. Again, it has pan automation for this bit because it pans to the right while the chords pan to the left. And then here the comb filter turns on and it becomes much more intense. I have the frequency shifter, which is shifting it down, the spectral blur, which is sort of washing it out for the entire thing. Oh no, where's my mouse gone? Where's my mouse gone? This spectral blur, which sort of washes it out halfway through. And then another Max for Live device, RMFM. I'm not entirely sure what it does. I assume it's a ring modulator followed by a frequency modulator, but I automated the dry wet of that during the section as well, just creating sort of a fill section before the second plug comes in. It also gets sent to the reverb quite a lot. This second plug has a little automation as well. In this section here, the resonator becomes a lot more intense. And then I have some pan automation sort of halfway through. Just going from right to left, right to left. At that point there's also a spectral blur which turns on. The most important part of this sound definitely is the erosion. This is what it sounds like with. This is it without. This Reese is quite standard. It's just a serum patch, which I've saved as a preset for because it's my go-to Reese. It has two waveforms again from Better Shapes, a sub, some noise, a low pass, both these are being detuned, multiband compression to bring the highs up, but then the highs are being brought back down again by a filter into distortion and another filter behind that. This LFO is super slow, 32 bars, and this just gives it some really slow, subtle movement, whereas this one is on 1.5 Hz, and this sort of accentuates it a little bit. After that, just two saturators again. Man, I just want to record this shit. Why does my computer have to be absolutely choking at one serum patch, which isn't even oversampled? Fuck it, they're not getting an audio preview for this one. At this pause section, I automate the drive down to -36 on both of them, and then the Reese fades back in afterwards. Just before the second half of the drop, I have a tiny snippet of this train sound. For the outro, this chords pad gets an auto pan. And it keeps that auto pan and then just gets low passed and fades out that way. This second one also gets low passed, but this time by the distortion filter, which is actually in the serum patch itself. It's worth noting that it's playing exactly the same MIDI as this first chord is playing in the second drop. This tongue drum loop is slowed down, so going from this speed in the second drop to being pitched down and slowed as well. And then I wanted to accentuate just a small bit of it, so this filter goes up and so does the utility, just for this section here. This first plug just has varying amounts of reverb and delay in the outro. And then I wanted to accentuate this bit down here, so I added a saturator and just automated that slightly. This second plug does pretty much nothing in the outro, it just plays two chords. The Reese fades out, again using the drive control. Really out here freezing my entire goddamn Reese track just to play this preview. I'm gonna fucking lose it. This Reese just gets faded out using the drive controls on both of the saturators. And then I have the plain sound with the same filtering on it, this time the cutoff going down, but the plain sound is reversed, which sort of gives a clean ending to all of it. Yep, I'm fucking done. Oh, man. What the fuck? I can't even click on OBS.